Hello and welcome to Everyday Lessons Every Day. Based on my book by the same name, this podcast is for anyone who wants to learn, grow, and improve. When I was going through a difficult time, I turned to self-improvement books to work on myself and my relationships. Committing to reading every day and applying the everyday lessons that I learned literally saved me and my family. I've learned the power of personal development, and I want to share it with the world. To that end, I invite everyday people to share their everyday lessons and how those lessons are changing their lives for the better. This week, I sat down with Eric Griffin, musician and middle school band director. In fact, Eric was Zoe's band director, and that's how we met and became friends. In conversations with Eric, I found that he's a man who really does make an effort to improve and be the best version of himself, which, as you know, is pretty much the theme of Everyday Lessons Every Day. Eric's lesson is, in my opinion, a bold one, and it may make you reflect a bit on the world around you and how you see other people in it. Here's my interview with Eric. Hello, Eric. How are you?
I'm good. Glad to be here.
Welcome to Everyday Lessons Every Day, the podcast.
So glad to join you.
I'm glad to have you. We've been friends for a little while now, and I know that you are a consumer of positive content. We even were in kind of we made an attempt at a book club there for a little bit, didn't we?
Yeah, it worked for a few sessions, as I recall.
It was like early on during the quarantine, and we were like figuring out Zoom, and got together with a bunch of us, and we talked about what was the book? The Slight Edge, I think.
Yes.
That's a good one.
Yes.
Well, thanks for being here. Please tell our guests a little bit about who you are so that they have a feel for who they're going to listen to for the next 15 or 20 minutes.
Okay, great. Again, my name is Eric Griffin, and I spend my days during the day teaching middle school kids how to play music. I'm a middle school band director by trade. That's what I've been doing for the last 11 years, and prior to that, professionally, was a high school band director, again, for 13 years prior to that. And along the way, I've done a few other musical things here and there just as a freelance performer, composer. I've done a little bit of college adjunct music teaching work, and that's where I've been career-wise. Personally, I'm married and I have 3 kids, 2 of my own and 1 from my wife, and live in Olathe and just enjoy life and everybody around me.
And that's how we met. You were my daughter's middle school teacher.
That's right.
And she has really embraced band, and I give you a lot of credit for that. She was really a big fan of your teaching.
Oh, that's always very rewarding to see.
Yeah, we like to hear that what we do for a living actually makes a difference, don't we?
Yeah, no doubt.
And I also want to point out that you are the composer. You are the composer and musician of the Everyday Lessons Everyday soundtrack.
Yeah, I am, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to provide that. It's always fun to log on and hear the new episode and go, "Oh yeah, there's that guy," and I made that, so it's kind of
I
fun.
don't know why you're thanking me. You offered to do it for me, no charge, and I should send you like a basket of brownies or something. I didn't do nothing. Just, but it was better than finding some old, royalty free stuff that everybody else uses. So I really, really appreciate having my own soundtrack, and that's all I use. So thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
All right, well, let's get to the topic at hand. Your everyday lesson. Where did it come from?
It really came from a book that I was presented with in a graduate class that I was in about 8 years ago when I was starting my master's in educational administration at the time. And the first class in that program was just an overview of what it's like to be an administrator in a public school. And the first book that we were challenged with, that we were assigned to read and to study through, was called Leadership and Self-Deception, Getting Out of the Box by the Arbinger Institute. And that has stuck with me now for years. It was kind of a light switch that flipped on during a time that was a pretty difficult time in life for me, actually, and changed a lot of the way that I looked at what I do in my career at the time, and how I relate to other people. And it's a book it's an oldie but a goodie. It was written 21 years ago, I think, and has been re-released a few times, but I reread it about every other year just as kind of a little self check.
You said it came along at a difficult time in your life. Are you able to share with us what was going on?
Certainly. That was shortly after my first marriage was coming to an end, or really as it was coming to an end. And as those things sometimes go, there was all kinds of blame casts in different directions, and this was a kind of harsh mirror, honestly, that I had to look at and do some pretty serious self-reflecting on a personal level. Besides, that's to say nothing of the deep impact that I think it really made on me as a professional, and that I, like I said, really kind of feel daily at this point.
All right. Well, is there one big light switch, one big everyday lesson that you got from the book?
Yes, the main lesson was, boy, stating it this way is going to really make me sound like such an ogre beforehand, and I really don't think it was quite that way. But it kind of cast things in a different light. The lesson was that you do everyone a disfavor if you fail to see them as people in every situation, as opposed to seeing them as an asset or an obstacle or anything in between there. And if you're in a position of leadership and you're very goal focused, sometimes the people who are part of your team, the people you're responsible for leading, or the people you're working with, it's easy to see them for what you think they're worth rather than for their worth as a person who has feelings and has skin in the game and has their own values at stake.
Eric, I don't think that makes you sound like an ogre at all. I think that's how most of the world sees the rest of the world, unfortunately. I don't think we see each other as people often enough.
Well, regardless of how it kind of does paint me, I know that that's the lesson that I took from it, and I can talk about this now on a personal level. Like I said, I was reading this while I was in the middle of a divorce and going, "Holy cow!" Some of the things being leveled at me probably have a lot of truth to them. Um, Prior to this point, this was maybe just a couple of years after I had changed assignments professionally and had gone from a high school band director to a middle school band director, and when a new school opened up. And I chose to go that route because at the time my own kids were early elementary age and they were beginning to be more active in their interests in pursuing them. And the nature of being a high school band director is that you're necessarily really committed to your to your job, and a lot of extra nights and weekends and things like that, as a lot of busy professionals are in real life. And when I had the opportunity to choose, I can see all my kids' stuff, or I can be part of this program that I had built, at another high school for a long time. I thought that I only get to raise kids once. I've got a whole lifetime to spend in my career, and that made the choice easy. At least it seemed to make the choice easy, because then came the hard part, and that is relearning my craft and how to go from being a high school band director to being a new middle school band director. And that sounds pretty similar, especially if you're not in this space. But to make a long story short, at the high school level, I had a pretty fair amount of success, probably more than I deserved to have. And what I remember about it was being really performance focused, very product focused, and would be leading, a couple hundred teenagers toward the next big concert, the next competition, toward whatever the next big trip was that we were going to do or anything like that. And so we as a group, and I as a teacher and leader, was always very product focused and what the performance was going to be like, and then we worked backwards from there to determine the process. And that got me used to one way of working, one way of thinking. And then when I then went to middle school and had very little experience teaching kids who are between 11 and 13 and just reaching 14, as an eighth grader, as a middle school student, they have a lot less experience and a lot less confidence in what they're doing when they pick up an instrument and they play. Combine that with some pretty inherent self consciousness that a lot of kids at that age just have as part and parcel of just being who you are as an adolescent or young adolescent. I was not prepared for that. And I went into the opening of a new middle school still being pretty product oriented, pretty performance oriented, and thinking that, well, of course, all of the kids are just going to flow along with me because this is the direction I'm leading. And granted, I give you all this insight through hindsight now, through that lens. But I remember really clearly on about the second or third day of school, the very first year we were open, in front of these beautiful, sweet children, sixth graders, a kid coming up to me as I'm getting ready to teach them the finer points of whatever we're going to learn that day musically. And he says, "I can't open my locker." And I looked at him like he's from some other planet and said, not out loud, but in my head, I'm going, "Kid, get out of my face and go get your clarinet and put it together. We got music to make." And so, again, explaining it like this, I do feel kinda like an ogre, because that poor kid was operating out, that kid had the boldness to come up to me, a stranger at the time, at the beginning of the year, an adult who he's looking to for guidance, and ask for help, and I know that I did not respond in a way that met that kid where he was, and that's what that kid needed at that moment. That kid did not need to know the alternate fingering for an F sharp,
Definitely
you know?
not. So you're reading, is this about the same time you're reading the book? All this is happening at the same time? And
It's a little out of sequence. The middle school's opening up, a couple of years before, right? So this and I provide that as background information because I didn't have the chops that I needed at the time, nor the outlook that I needed at the time in order to serve those kids and to be who they needed me to be. And then when I decide I'm gonna take up educational administration, I presented this book, and it was kind of smacking me in the forehead, and I'm going, "Oh." Okay, yes, this is how I can see my students, my coworkers, the people in my professional life and in my personal circle differently, and that's who they need me to be, and that's who I need to be for them.
all right, so you started seeing them as people instead
Yeah,
of assets, or what else did you say they might be?
they could be sometimes obstacles. A kid who is in the middle of a seventh grade band rehearsal and is in it's always the percussion section, isn't it? They're standing back there just whacking at whatever they can to avoid being bored. And so, of course, to me, when I'm trying to get everybody else to learn something else, that in that moment is framed as an obstacle for me, at the time, or at least it was. And instead, I knew that I needed to see that kid as a kid who has a need right then. Nobody does nothing, least of all a middle school kid. They will never do nothing. And the something that they do, unless they have some direction from me, is probably not going to be the something that I need them to do. And so I've learned to look at that in a more proactive way, I guess. I, it's a roundabout way of explaining this, I suppose.
Well, no, that's okay. Now bring us to today. Like, you've got this lesson under your belt. How does it change how you teach, how you interact with your peers and the students?
Yeah. I think for me, every morning and every class period, because I get a fresh group of young teenagers 6 times a day, right? And they come in and
Oh my God.
yeah, 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 yeah. It's awesome. It's awesome because I get nothing but kids and music all day long every day, and it really genuinely is just awesome. So when they come in the door, then there is such a rainbow, such a spectrum of motivation levels from the kids, skill levels from the kids, different reasons for being there, right? And then I see it as my task to see how many of those I can meet head on, right? And meet as exactly as I can. And it starts with when the kids are coming in the door, I look them in the eye and say their name and ask them how they're doing, and try to do that in a way that is pretty personal and not just a flippant tossed off greeting. Goal number one for me is for all of the students to know that I actually care about them. And if I don't start with a foundation like that, then why should they care if they're following their key signature or not? Why should they care if they can count eighth notes or not? And why should they care if they're a member of a team that we're trying to get ready for at some point of performance to show off what they learned, if I, as their leader, can't express some investment in who they are?
Reminds me of the old quote, people don't care about how much you know until they know how much you care.
Yeah, that's precisely what it is. And where this book hits home and ties into that idea is, if your outlook is not in the people you're working with as people, then you've already cut yourself off at the knees if you're working with them as a leader or just as a team member. The book itself is written from a first person narrative point of view. Okay, so throughout. We never know the narrator's name, but he's starting a new position at a new company called the Zagram Corporation, which is a fictional corporation. And in his first days, he's arranged to meet with the CEO named Bud. And the book is a long series of vignettes and life lessons and philosophical questions and examples batted back and forth. And what we find between Bud and the narrator, and what we find is that the narrator's history is that he was kind of a jerk. And of course, this is, I think, stated hyperbolically. Is that a word?
I don't know, but
Hyperbolically.
it is now.
It's exaggerated. There we go. It's stated in exaggerated form to make a point, of course, And Bud is an exaggerated character also who's got sage advice. He's like Yoda, to the main character's situations. But really does kind of paint valuable lessons in pictures for how we can see each other as people first. For example, the main character, through some way, shape, or form, in one chapter, is led through admitting that when he used the family car, he just brought it back home in the evening, knowing that the tank was almost empty, and he thought, "Oh, my wife can fill up tomorrow." When he drove straight past a gas station on the way home, and he's like, "Well, I'm busy and I've worked hard today, so she can take care of that." Little things like that, I think, matter a lot. I think they matter a great deal, and just small gestures of thoughtfulness are what is meant, I think, by looking at people as people and not as objects.
It sounds like the book nailed it for you as a teacher because you're dealing with all these children. But it also sounds like it would be great for a coach or any kind of manager or really anyone who is surrounded by people in their career and sees them as assets or obstacles instead of people. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would, and there are actually application chapters late in the book that discuss that discuss how this can apply to lots of different professional situations and lots of needs in the workplace or in personal relationships, personal situations. And the book, of course, kind of stipulates its own vocabulary, what it means in the title, the subtitle, as being in the box. And self-deception is just this notion of seeing other people as objects and not as people. And then to get out of the box, it really is just a matter of starting an interaction, starting a solution to a problem with acknowledging that everybody's got skin in the game in some way, shape, or form here, whether it's they're sharing the goal that your team is working on in the workplace, or whether it's just that they need a break. And like you said, as a teacher, for me, it is knowing that some students come in here. Some students enter my room feeling great and they're going to rock it. Some students come in going, yeah, whatever, it's band. It's the next thing I'm doing today. And some students come in going, we're doing the same music again, and I know that I can't play this and I'm going to fail. And we've got all points in between there.
I can't imagine the challenge of teaching band because when I was in high school, I was in band. I had no intention of ever being a professional musician. For me, it was just to hang out with friends,
Sure.
you know? But then, of course, I remember a girl named Tracy, first chair saxophone, like studied all the time. She was amazing, right? Like, how do you even deal with those two people being in the same room? How do you teach those two people? I'm just here for fun and I want to be a professional musician one day. That has to be a huge challenge.
It is a challenge, but again, the way I try to approach it is remembering that you got your reasons and they've got their reasons. How do we bring those together? That's
Awesome.
that's the trick.
Yeah. Well, why did you want to share that particular story on the show today? What made you want to be a guest on Everyday Lessons? And what do you want people to take away today?
What brought this to mind, and the reason I wanted to share this specifically, is because I think that so many of us, and when I say so many of us, I am pointing to me. When life gets hard, sometimes it's tough to admit that we're the ones making it hard on ourselves. And it is often because we want to treat symptoms of a problem rather than the problem itself. Um, At times when I have felt overwhelmed with, difficult relationships, lack of progress in either what I might be working on personally, professionally, it is I might have a tendency to kind of try and attack every little thing to try to spin every little plate. And that's overwhelming. And I think that the more I personally can pull back a little bit and go, okay, what's the common thread that ties this together? That common thread usually is just how am I with people? Am I thoughtful? Am I recognizing that the best leaders are actually teammates and not bosses? The best leaders are servants. The best leaders I admire, they're servant leaders, and there are volumes and volumes and volumes written about that, I know, and I've
Hmm.
got little to add to that. I've got a lot to learn from it, but little to add to it. That's why I wanted to bring this. That brings to mind actually another chapter of the book, or another vignette in the everyday, or the everyday lessons. That's your book. The leadership and self deception book that I'm talking about here is I forget the I'm trying to come up with the German name of a physician in the mid 1800s. He did a study of a maternity ward of a hospital in Germany, and I forget what city, but they were trying to figure out why one area of the hospital had a lot more mortality rates for both the mother and the newborn child, and another area did not have anything like this kind of mortality rate, and it was severe. The difference was very severe, and it was a real problem. And the first theory was that they were blaming the doctors. The doctors are just bad. That we got to put different doctors down here at this area and go retrain the doctors where we're losing too much life here. And nothing changed. And in fact, it got worse. And so finally, the name is going to come to me any moment. I think in the middle of the story, of course. Finally, when they followed everybody around, they had the bright idea. Mind you, this is mid 1800s. The bright idea to have all the doctors wash their hands. And so, because that wasn't part of common practice, beforehand, doctors were going from one birth room or one floor to another floor, spreading all kinds of illness through pathogens. They said, okay, we're going to wash our hands. And poof, what do you know? There were a lot fewer deaths days after births and things like that. And so the takeaway for me that is look for the problem underlying the problem. When I'm overwhelmed with issues with people, with lack of progress at what I'm trying to accomplish, either at the workplace or at home, then I've got to look for some common theme. And the best leaders I know of, like even in my field, in my space, a conductor who can get on the podium and instead of going, in measure 8, clarinets play louder, and in measure 14, flutes play an E flat, and on and down the whole orchestra or the whole band, they can get up and recognize that music is a human expression, an expression of human experience and emotion, and they talk to the humans out there making music, and suddenly everything gets better.
Hmm.
And that's what makes me want to reread this book, and it's what kind of brought this book to mind to talk about with you today.
I love it. Well, this is not one that I'm familiar with, and you're not the first guest to mention the Arbinger Institute. So I think I need to dig into this one. I'm gonna pick it up for sure. Your story, though, real quick, I just have to add something. It kind of reminds me of when you meet a person who constantly complains that everyone is a terrible driver, and then you go for a ride with them and you realize they're the terrible driver. Have you ever had that experience?
Something like it. The thing about that I relate to is the show The Office. Somebody said, everybody knows somebody like a character in The Office, and you have to be on guard because if you're thinking, yeah, I know a Dwight and I know a Jim and I know a Pam, but I don't know a Michael Scott, it's probably because you are Michael Scott.
Oh no. Oh
But
no.
yeah, your point's taken. I think we're talking about the same thing in different words. Somebody who complains a lot, maybe. I know that's me. You got to look in the mirror.
Yeah. All right. Well, is there anything else you want to leave us with before I let you go?
Oh no, just want to thank you for. I consider it an honor to be here talking with you guys today, and hope that there's something here that is maybe a little insightful, perhaps along the way. So thanks
No,
for having me today.
of course. No, I'm the one who's lucky. Uh, you know what? I don't have a ton of listeners just yet. Maybe I never will. But the reality is, selfishly, I get to do these interviews every week and I get to have conversations like this. So if I never have anyone listen to them, I don't even care because this is good for my soul. This helps me grow. It points me in the direction of everyday lessons that are going to make me a better person. So, yay to the rest of the world. If y'all are listening, thank you. But really, I just do it for me. And today I did it for you too. So thank you very much.
Oh, my pleasure.
All right. I'll talk to you later.
Thanks.
Bye-bye. I don't know if you caught it, but Eric did something in this episode that I really liked. He learned an everyday lesson and he grew from it, and that's awesome. But isn't there also a great deal of value in looking back at your life, examining a time when you maybe weren't the best version of yourself and seeing how important a lesson that you learned later in life would have been valuable sooner? I know that there's a version of me before I read How to Win Friends and Influence People, and a version after. I know that the version before was more selfish, proud, and needy. In fact, I don't think it would be a stretch to say that high school and college David thought he lived at the center of the universe. And here's the thing. When I think of the David who didn't know anything about self-improvement and the David who does, I recognize the value of the genre as a whole. I cringe to think of who I would be today if I had not discovered this world. I think Eric took us on a similar journey. He said he didn't want to paint himself to look like an ogre, and I don't think he did. But he was seeing the same difference in himself before and after reading an important book that literally changed his life. And so my constant, ongoing challenge to you is obvious. Keep reading, keep listening, keep growing. You don't want to look back on today and realize you missed an everyday lesson that would have served you well had you embraced personal growth sooner. As for this week, I challenge you, no, I think Eric challenged you, to see people as people, with feelings of their own and skin in the game. They're not an asset, they're not an obstacle, and they're not something in between. They're just people who are trying to navigate their lives the best they can. So write people on your wrist and make sure that when you see the people in your life, you really see them, not for what they can do for you, but for who they are. Let me know what happens when you implement this lesson. I'd love to hear from you, and I can be reached at everydaylessonseveryday.com. If you liked this podcast, please share it with a friend. Let's see if together we can make the world a better place. I'll see you next time. Now go out there and do something awesome.